So good morning, everyone, and welcome. I would like to welcome Her Excellency, the President of the General Assembly, Ms. María Fernanda Espinosa, to the briefing room today. It's nice to see you on the eve of a holiday, so thank you very much for taking the time. As you know, this is her second press conference here in New York. She spoke to us on the 1st of October last month. And on UN Day, 24th of October, she gave a press conference to our UN correspondents in Geneva. So today, the PJ will make some opening remarks, and after that, we'll take your questions. So, Madam President, welcome. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Monica very well said, I really appreciate you being here just prior to the Thanksgiving holiday. So it really shows that you're interested in the happenings of the House. This is my second press conference. Why? Because this is my second month in office. On the 19th of November. This is my second press conference, but I had a press conference in Geneva when I was there, and also a press stakeout that you might remember. So we're not doing bad in terms of our relationship with the media, especially the journalists that are accredited here to the United Nations. I have requested myself to book this conversation with you because I really wanted to hear from you. You know, what are your concerns? What are your questions? Also to get some feedback, even off the record, we can have some of your feedback. You might remember that during our first encounter in October 1st, I mentioned how important it was for me to be in contact with you in the media, and I think that the media play a crucial role in helping us to tell others what my presidency wants to achieve. You know that I have said over and over again that we need to bring the UN closer to the people and the people closer to the UN. And this is done mainly not only with our decision making and our policy decisions and normative decisions, but through the work you do every day in the House. I have also met individually with many of you during these past 2 months. I have had the privilege to have bilateral interviews, but of course, always my office is an open door office, and you have Monica and Mark Seddon that are always, in contact and in touch with you. Since we last met on October 1st, we have been working on all my 7 priorities that I am sure that you know by heart by now, and I will make a few announcements today on these 7 priorities. Before I hand over the floor to you for your questions, I would like to highlight perhaps 2 very important upcoming events, starting with the Climate Change Conference of the Parties, COP24 in Katowice, in Poland. I will be there from the 1st to the 3rd of December for the opening and the inauguration of COP24. I think that there is a great expectation of what is going to happen there. One of my priorities is environmental action, which includes, of course, a strong emphasis on climate change. We have reached like a peak level in Paris with the Paris Agreement, but there is a lot that we need to do. What we expect in Katowice is to have a strong agreed program of work for the Paris Agreement. And it requires a lot of political will, a lot of commitment, a lot of flexibility in the negotiation process. We know that after the pre-COP in Thailand, what we have in hand is a 300-page document that has to be transformed, that has to mutate into, an achievable, action-oriented program of work. So we need to move quickly. I don't need to tell you because you're more knowledgeable than I am, but if you look at the report of the IPCC, which I have read carefully, we know that it is urgent. Climate action is urgent. We need to act as quickly as possible towards a green economy, to generating low carbon technologies, and low carbon technologies, by the way, it's a win-win situation because it's going to create thousands of new jobs, and that's what we need now in the world economy. This is a win-win situation, and we really need to have a cultural shift in our production and consumption patterns to really stop the trend of increasing the temperatures above 1.5 degrees Celsius. Is a real danger when we have experience already. I mean, it was so visual and felt in New York the last snowstorm in November. Completely, city that was not, prepared for something like that to happen. Just multiply this very small situation in New York, but multiply it in the entire world. So it is really a threat. It is really a survival issue. Climate change is a survival issue. The second event that I would like to highlight here is the conference on migration in Marrakesh, in Morocco, where we expect member states to adopt the Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. This is really a landmark agreement which will help us to ensure that migrants everywhere in the world have their rights safeguarded and are treated fairly. We know that the history of humanity is the history of people on the move. If we look our personal histories, we all have, my grandfather came from, my great-grandfather came from, we moved from this place to another. The history of humanity is a history of migration. So migration is part of the way the world develops, interacts, and interconnects. But of course, we have seen lately unusual migration flows that need to be tackled and need to be addressed multilaterally. And the response for that is precisely the Global Compact on migration that we will adopt in Marrakesh, and then we will be bringing that instrument to the General Assembly for consideration in December 18 of December. Okay. Just double checking with my team. So I think this is really going to be, a very meaningful moment, not only for the multilateral agenda on migration, but for a strong stand of the world on a framework that is going to help provide guidance to member states on migration issue. I wanted to very briefly touch on the two trips that I have made in these 2 months. The first trip was to Geneva. I think that you follow that closely. I had a press conference just to have, more closeness and to know better the journalists in Geneva, which I knew from the past when I was PR there. But I went to Geneva for the World Investment Summit. It was an impressive turnout of about 3,000 investors. Basically, the lemma was the private sector committing to delivering on the 2030 agenda. And I had the opportunity to have several bilateral meetings with heads of state and government. There were several heads of state and government basically on the message that I am bringing to everyone these days, which is the need to strengthen multilateralism, multilateral response, and to strengthen the United Nations. So around 4,000 business leaders, 50 heads of state and government and state ministers attended the World Investment Summit in Geneva. I was part of the opening, but also participated in several of the roundtables on different issues, but basically looking at issues of decent work, the 600 million jobs that need to be created until 2030. And during my visit to Geneva, I also took the opportunity to meet with all agencies that are based in Geneva. I had a very fruitful briefing with all ambassadors and PRs in Geneva, with all heads of agencies, but also a privileged opportunity to meet women ambassadors in Geneva. Why? Because they are really strong in pushing forward the agenda of gender parity in every activity that is undertaken in the Geneva, in our Geneva office. We want to import this good practice here to New York, and that was, I think, extremely important. We shared with the female ambassadors our strategy on the political empowerment of women, our event in the upcoming month of March, on women in power, and also some steps that we are foreseeing to encourage a greater female participation in all General Assembly activities. Of course, the second visit immediately after Geneva was a visit to the Vatican. I was invited by the Vatican Academy of Sciences to discuss yet another of my priorities, a very important conversation with world leaders on decent work and the future of work. So I attended that very important event, but also I had the privilege to meet Your Holiness Pope Francis, and we had an extensive conversation about the need to strengthen multilateralism. We had also a very interesting conversation on his concern and commitment to the rights of migrants and to climate change and the environmental agenda. Again, he recalled Laudato Si, which is, I would say, a charter of harmony between nature and society. So that was also extremely important and useful to the UN agenda. It is, I think that you know very well that we do live in very challenging times, and only together, through multilateralism, is that we can find common solutions to our collective challenges. During my second official trip, I was invited by President Macron to attend the centenary of the armistice, but also attended the World Peace Forum in Paris. There were 60 heads of state and government there. I had the opportunity to undertake informal bilateral meetings with several of them, but in particularly a close bilateral meeting with President Macron. It was, a close meeting with President Macron. Basically, the conversation was about multilateralism and the role of the United Nations. We are very privileged because France is one of our perhaps most, strong ally on the quest for a strong multilateralism. So Paris was a great opportunity to position both the Global Compact on Migration, the idea of boosting and recommitting to multilateralism and boosting the role of the United Nations in my bilateral encounters with heads of state and government. Not only I participated in the Peace Summit, but I also had the privilege to visit OECD and strengthen our collaboration, to visit the Director General of UNESCO, especially to team up in the organization of an upcoming high-level event that is mandated to the General Assembly on the role of culture for the achievement of the 2030 agenda. In Paris as well, I had a little window, and that for me very important to put the foot on the ground, as I say, two very important encounters. One with youth at Sciences Po, where I gave a conference, and I had the opportunity to interact with young students at Sciences Po in Paris, but also a very, in numbers, a very small and powerful opportunity to meet with women migrants in Paris. A wonderful project that is headed by the Ministry of the Interior in France, where they bring women migrants to learn French so they are able to help their children in school and school homework, but also it provides an opportunity for mothers to come together from different languages, backgrounds, and cultures, and to have, some bonding mechanism, and therefore it is an inclusion exercise and effort. This experience really was extremely touching, but extremely encouraging, which means that really the idea of open arms for migrants, it's enriching for societies and extremely, I would say, not that difficult to do. I saw it with my own eyes. I heard these women, their own experiences, their process of learning the French language, but also the opportunity for them to meet and encounter other women in the same situation. So that was extremely useful, and I think that we need to touch, the heart and see what migration is about, and the positive impacts of migration as well. I mentioned my meeting with UNESCO General Director, ICD, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That regarding the two trips, but again here, perhaps very briefly, I don't want to bore you. I know this is not going to make headlines, but I think you need to know firsthand how the work of our committees is doing. The committees are the arms of the General Assembly. So I think it's important that you know that the first committee concluded its work adopting the highest number of resolutions ever. There were 68 resolutions adopted by the first committee. There were 42 recorded votes on the adoption of the resolutions, and 26 resolutions adopted without a vote, which means that more than half were resolutions voted upon. We had an incredible participation in both the general debate and the thematic discussions within the committee. And this signals a growing interest on issues of disarmament, on international security. And I think that this was also obvious during the speeches of heads of state and government during the high-level week. 131 in 2017, and 354 interventions, plus 4 observers in 2018. So that's for the first committee. The second committee, very quickly, hasn't finalized its work yet. It is expected that they will finish on the 29th of November, meaning next Friday. So far, 5 resolutions were adopted in the second committee, 3 by consensus and 2 by a vote. In the last GA session, this committee adopted 42 resolutions in total, 30 by consensus and 12 by vote. We will see what happens and how it unravels next week. I don't want to hide to you that it's been, very contentious interactions. I'm sure that you have followed as well. So I hope that the Bureau and the Chair will achieve, positive results at the end of next week with openness, frank dialogue, and a constructive spirit, which is aimed at. The third committee concluded successfully its work yesterday. Last evening, there were 57 draft resolutions adopted, 57 resolutions, and basically 37 by consensus, 20 by vote, with 14 amendments. 7 were oral amendments and 7 written. There were 580 statements during the works of the third committee under 11 agenda items, and 592 statements heard in interactive dialogues. Last year, the same committee adopted 63 resolutions. We will see. There is a little decrease in the number of resolutions, but an increase, in the number of voted resolutions. The fourth committee finished its work on the 16th of November. The agenda items allocated to it by the General Assembly were from items 47 to 63, but this is very technical. The committee, the fourth committee, adopted 36 resolutions and 4 draft decisions relating to peacekeeping operations, special political missions, public information, peaceful use of outer space, atomic radiation, and the Palestinian issues in fourth committee. The committee held 28 informal meetings instead of the 26 that were envisaged, 2 more than expected in the program of work. Last year, the committee approved 39 resolutions and 4 draft decisions and 28 formal meetings. So Fifth Committee is still working. You all know that. Fifth Committee is still working. It's expected to finalize its considerations on the 14th of December, but we will see. For this main session, we have to know that there are several very critical issues on the Fifth Committee. Basically, scales of assessment. This is a very well-debated issues, special political missions, and decisions related to the UN reform process, which are extremely important. I have to tell you also that I address each one of the committees before they started their work to provide some guidance and to share with them the expectations on the outcomes of the work of the committees. The Sixth Committee ended its work on the 13th of November, adopted 23 resolutions by consensus, 1 less resolutions than last year. Another issue that I wanted to share with you is that we continue to make efforts towards the campaign against plastic pollution in oceans and the elimination of single-use plastics. We really are pushing very hard on that. I had very good news from our office in Geneva. The director of the office in Geneva promised that in 2019, the Geneva office is going to be a single-use plastic-free office of the United Nations. We continue to work on the strategy. Today, I will hold a working luncheon with several member states to get their feedback and ideas on the launching of the plastics campaign. I've been working on all the 7 priorities on the day of the fight of violence against women. I also held a luncheon with several member states to share with them our strategy and initiative on gender equality. Today is going to be on the environment, and I will hold informal consultations with several member states during also the coming weeks. I'm sure that you have followed, but I had also appointed several co-chairs to facilitate key processes under the auspices of the General Assembly. One that is very close to my mandate and my commitment is the revitalization of the General Assembly. It is part of my 7 priorities. I had appointed the PR of Jordan and the PR of Slovakia to co-chair the consultations and prepare for the adoption of a resolution on revitalization of the works of the General Assembly. The other very important issue is the declaration on the South-South Cooperation conference that happens every 40 years. It's going to happen next year from the 20th to the 22nd of March in Buenos Aires, Argentina. South-South Cooperation agenda is extremely important, especially for G77 countries. I have appointed the PRs of Uganda and Lithuania to undertake the consultations and craft, together with member states, the outcome document for the South-South Cooperation Conference. Other very important issue under our agenda is the landlocked developing countries. We are mandated to have a political declaration for the high-level midterm review on the implementation of the Vienna Program of Action. For that consultation process, I appointed the PR of Bhutan and the PR of Austria. As you can tell, my co-facilitators are in general men and women, north and south. It's not always easy, but gender balance, regional balance in the co-facilitation processes. Global Pact on the Environment, the process is going to be held partially in the office in Kenya, Nairobi, and partially also in New York. The document is going to come back for consideration of the General Assembly in the month of June. I have reappointed the two co-facilitators for the Pact on Migration, Ambassador of Portugal and Ambassador of Lebanon. Another key important issue, I'm listing these so you can also follow the track of these processes. Financing for development is going to be part of the high-level week next year. I had appointed the ambassador of Bahamas and the ambassador of Sweden to facilitate the negotiation towards the FFD conference during the 74th session. And finally, on Security Council reform, these names were announced yesterday. I had reappointed the PR of the Emirates, and also appointed the PR of Luxembourg to co-facilitate Security Council reform. I think I left a process out, which is the process on the high-level dialogue no, I already mentioned that, financing for development. It's Ghana and Canada that will be facilitating that process. I continue to work under the framework of the DARE acronym. If you forgot, I can, remind you that DARE is of delivery, accountability, relevance, and efficiency. So I continue to work on that. So these are the issues that I wanted to share with you. I think you need to be well informed. Some of these issues, of course, do not make headlines, but I think it's important that you know what is happening in the House, how the committee's work is progressing, how we're doing in the negotiation processes in the House, but also know firsthand what I do when I travel in representation of the 193 states, member states. So these are the issues I wanted to share, but I am really eager to hear from you and to listen to your questions.
Thank you very much, Madam President. So the first question goes to Danka. Thank you.
Madam President, thank you. On behalf of the United Nations Correspondent Association, we are really pleased to have this press conference with you. I'm Gianpaolo Pioli, Quotidiano Nazionale, and I have a question that today around the world there are a lot of reaction after the statement of President Trump regarding the killing of the journalist Khashoggi, dismembered in the consulate in Saudi consulate in Istanbul. I want to know what's your position, and if the General Assembly has a position, or if you had any reaction inside that you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we get another question, and then probably if you prefer, yes, and then she answers too, so if you don't mind.
Then we get proper answers if we have one by one.
Yes, yes.
Okay, you prefer one by one?
I much prefer it, because then we get direct answers to the direct
Okay,
questions.
okay, that's good. That's fair enough. Okay,
Okay,
I'll go to you afterwards.
On the Khashoggi killing, I don't know if you remembered, but as soon as his death was confirmed, I immediately reacted condemning the killing, and I also publicly requested for an urgent, independent, and thorough investigation on the case. And I also mentioned that the assassination responsibles should be, held accountable. And I think that this situation has evolved. I had been in contact with both the Secretary General and the High Commissioner on Human Rights on this issue. And I think that the process is evolving. Of course, the General Assembly cannot conduct investigations itself, but there are several mechanisms in place. I just want to remind ourselves, and perhaps you know better than I do, but just this year alone, 45 journalists, professionals have been killed, which is simply really not acceptable. One death is already too many.
So this is a follow-up. May I ask you the reaction about the statement of President Trump? Not just, I know this previous statement.
Well, what is the reaction is the sovereign decision of a member state. So I cannot, comment on something that head of a state that is a member state of the UN has expressed on this issue. I am sharing with you, which I think is very important, what is the position of the President of the General Assembly, what has been the position of the General Assembly and of the United Nations on these particular issues. But also I've been doing some research on the issue because this is a very strong, unacceptable, terrible situation. But I think it is unfortunately not, the single case that we have. This is a very difficult case, but I am saying that 45 professionals have been killed already during this year alone. But doing research, I have encountered a resolution, a General Assembly resolution on this very issue. It's resolution A/C3/72/L35. And this resolution requests the Secretary General to further assist in the implementation of the present resolution, etc., on its 74th session. So the resolution itself condemns unequivocally all attacks and violence against journalists and media workers, such as torture, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearance, arbitrary arrest and arbitrary detention, etc., etc. So there is a normative tool that the General Assembly has come up with. I think it's very important also to refer to that. And of course, the situation is, unraveling while we speak. So we will see what happens. I am addressing to this particular issue, not to a specific comment from a head of state.
Thank you very much, Madam President. James, I'm going to go back to you. Let me just go to the colleague there. Okay, go ahead, please. Yes.
Yes, thank you very much for the conference. My name is Naufal Enhari. I'm with the Moroccan news agency MAP. My question is regarding the Global Compact on Migration. So what are your expectations from the Marrakesh conference? I mean, beyond the adoption of the Global Compact, what are you looking forward to in Marrakesh to achieve in terms of dialogue with all the member states? And another related question is, what do you think of Morocco's commitment towards the resolving the issue of migration in general in the world? Morocco is very active in Africa.
Yeah.
He has adopted a new asylum legislation. So what do you think about that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you allow me, Madam President, I will take your questions as well, James, so that we agilize a little bit because we have many questions and we have not much time. James, go ahead,
well,
please.
it's a very specific question, and it's a follow-up on the earlier question about Khashoggi. You said the situation is evolving. I'm not quite sure how it's evolving. You look at the UN's own special rapporteurs for protection to the right of freedom of opinion, the special rapporteur on extrajudicial summary and arbitrary executions, and the working group on enforced and involuntary disappearances. They've written a letter in the last 24 hours saying there is a lack of any mechanism of independent investigation and accountability. They're calling for the UN to do something. This is the UN's own system people who deal with these specific issues. The Secretary General's made it clear he will act if he gets a referral from one of the legislative bodies. You are the President of the General Assembly, one of those bodies that won't investigate, but could give a mandate to an investigation. In your convening role, have you been having meetings with member states about the idea of having a motion to endorse a mandate for an investigation?
Thank you, James.
Well, very concretely, basically, there is can be a request from a member state. It doesn't mean that we need a General Assembly decision on this issue. I've been, of course, having conversations with several member states on this particular issue because we are concerned. We are concerned, and I've been having conversations both with the Secretary General and with the High Commissioner on Human Rights. And the General Assembly itself cannot undertake an investigation by itself. But what the Secretary, I have to confirm that because, as I understand, there is the request of a member state, of several member states, to the Secretary General. So I basically, we are all interested, and I have made that explicit of independent, thorough, and urgent investigation. So what is the form that takes? I think we need to abide by the rules and also the mandate and the capacity of each one of the UN bodies.
Okay, let's go back to migration now. Thank you very much.
On migration and the expectations of Marrakesh, basically the Morocco has a very strong commitment to migration issues in general. I think that the sign of that commitment is the very organization of the Marrakesh Conference for the adoption of the Global Compact. The feedback I have received so far is that Morocco is going to be well attended. It will enjoy the presence of several heads of state and government from different regions of the world. The idea is that Marrakesh will adopt the compact, and then the compact will come back to the General Assembly. What is important, what is the expectation? The expectation is to send a very strong and bold message on the need to have a shared framework on migration issues, to ensure that migration is orderly, to ensure that migration is regular, and to also really say that migration requires a multilateral, a collective response, because it is by nature a transboundary issue. The role that Marrakesh is playing is extremely important in leading by example and having a very active role. So we have, great expectations for Marrakesh. It is going to be the opportunity for heads of state and government to send a very strong and bold message for the need for a shared framework, which, if you read the compact, it's not a legally binding instrument, but it is a framework for countries to relate to enable cooperation, to enable also burden sharing. It is a very balanced approach between, countries of origin and countries of destination. And we see now and today that there is more need than ever to have this agreed and common framework on migration.
Thank you, Madam President. A household information I should have given actually in the beginning. We have a translation into Spanish, so if someone would like to ask a question. Hamid, and afterwards Carol, and I'll go back to, I'll go back to you in a minute. Okay, Hamid. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hamid Sayam from Al-Quds Al-Arabi. In 1966, 14 of December, the General Assembly adopted the Declaration on Granting Independence for Colonial Countries and Peoples. It was considered one of the most seminal achievement of the General Assembly, which brought so many countries to become independent and join the UN. In Article 2, there's no people should be subject to foreign domination and occupation. And Article 2, every people is entitled to self-determination. Do you still see this declaration valid? Do you see that? Do you believe in it? And if so, why only the Palestinian people out of the whole world is not given this chance to exercise self-determination And what should be done to do that? Thank you very much.
Well, on the Palestinian issue, I think that I have been, very also bold on the Palestinian issue. And I think that we have so many, not only the ones you very well cited and quoted, but we have so many resolutions on the Palestinian issue. General Assembly resolutions, but Security Council resolutions. The call is to comply with the existing resolutions that this body, the United Nations, has delivered, and to really push for what we committed to, which is the two-state solution for the Palestinian situation. And of course, it is of concern the suffering of civilians, the suffering of people that live in the borders, that have to face very difficult situations. So the Palestinian situation is an unjust situation. And I think the international community needs to commit and deliver on this particular issue. The only call is that we need to comply with our commitments on the already existing resolutions on the Palestinian issue. It's the only thing we need to do. When I say the only thing, I'm not naive, because we know that all the stakeholders, the countries involved, have very strong positions. But the call is for a diplomatic solution. So the Palestinian question, the only way to address and solve the issue is through dialogue and through a peaceful solution.
Thank you very much. We're going to, Sato, I'll go to you in a minute. So I have Carol, Neda, and then afterwards Sato. Go ahead, Carol. Thanks.
Madam President, I'm Carol Landry with Agence France-Presse. I wanted to come back to the migration compact, which is clearly unraveling. Eastern European countries are pulling out, Australia today. Now, can you explain to us what you think is going on? It is a non-binding document. Mm-hmm. Why is it being contested now?
Well, it is true that we have seen a few countries deciding not to join the Global Compact. I think that you repeated a fact that this is a framework. It's a non-binding framework. The beauty of the compact is that it allows, enormous flexibility for countries to use the parts of the compact that can be adapted to their sovereign decisions, to their existing legal frameworks, and it is a framework. It is a cooperation instrument. So we basically fully understand the decision of some countries that have decided that they're not ready to commit. And it's perhaps because they're taking the issue of migration very seriously, and they need to have greater discussions and conversations domestically. And we have to respect that. So what is encouraging is that the highest number of countries, the UN member states, are committed to the compact, are going to come to Marrakesh, and then we will be working here in New York at the General Assembly for the roadmap for implementation. Implementation of the compact is going to benefit all. It's about partnerships, it's about cooperation, it's about exchange of good practices. So, and we will really call on every member state to be part of this, collective framework that countries agreed on in July this year. So I think that we should be very respectful on the sovereign decision of certain countries, but let's hope that it will rejoin the compact in order that we can all work together to ensure that migration it benefits all sides and the people on the move.
Madam President, while you cross over to Neda from the BBC, there's some breaking news here in regard with the date, so if you would like to confirm the date of the considerations.
Yes, yes, I said 18th of December. No, it's 19th. one
Lovely.
day after that the General Assembly will address the issue. We will consider the compact on the 19th of December.
Thank you very much. Neda, BBC, please, go ahead. I'll
Thank you.
go back to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Two questions, if I may. Just following up again on Jamal Kashoggi. Have you, when you had consultations with member states that you spoke about, did any specifically ask for an investigation? Was that at all part of your conversations with member states? And then again on the migration compact, as Carol mentioned, many people are kind of pulling out, including even Sweden today. But are there any positive signs you can point to in this document? Have any of the recommendations in there been at all taken on by any member states? Are there any positives you can point to before the conference begins?
Okay, on Khashoggi's issue, of course, there is a concern, a preoccupation in the House regarding his killing. I have to be very honest with you. I mean, none of the countries that I have spoken to are speaking about any sort of investigation except on the one that was called at the beginning and that I had supported myself in terms of independent and thorough and urgent. We haven't discussed about any specific request on a particular form of investigation on the issue. And of course, in my conversations with the High Commissioner, she's also extremely concerned. Gentlemen here mentioned already some of the concerns and explicit requests from the special procedures, the human rights and special procedures that I think should be taken into account. Regarding the Global Compact on Migration, the Global Compact on Migration was adopted the past July. We have been preparing for the conference in Marrakesh. I think that every day we have a proof that we need a shared framework on migration because we see issues emerging every day on migration and unusual migration flows around the world. So we do really need a shared agreement between countries to ensure that the human rights of migrants are guaranteed and that we promote an orderly and regular migration around the world. What are the recommendations of the compact that have been implemented? We can see success stories of migration in every corner of the world. In the same way that we see, concerning, unusual movements of people, we see that we have really, good practices and success stories in many parts of the world. Countries that have been extremely generous, for example, with refugees. Let's look at Lebanon, let's look at Jordan, let's look at Ecuador, my own country, which is the country with the highest number of refugees in the Western Hemisphere, the majority of them being the consequence of the Colombian conflict, for example. So there are success stories, and these success stories were factored in when discussing and debating and negotiating the Global Compact on migration. So the message here is that we need a Global Compact that is comprehensive, that is balanced, that fosters cooperation more than ever.
Okay, Sato, go ahead. Okay, I'll get back to you.
Thank you, Monica. Hello, Madam President. My name is Sato from Japan TV NHK. My question is about universal health coverage. The recently, including Japan, some member states established a co-facilitating body for the next year's high-level meeting on the universal health coverage. So what can you do for the accelerating the universal health coverage for next year? And what do you expect, especially to the Japan? Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think that I have high hopes for a very strong outcome and for also a very successful high-level meeting during the next General Assembly. We have very two able co-facilitators that I had reappointed, which are Thailand and Hungary, that are co-facilitating the consultations. We are expecting to have a very strong stand on, fostering and encouraging universal health coverage. I know that there are several member states that are fully committed to this issue, one of them being Japan, of course, and we expect to have, an outcome that would be equally, as strong and as clear as, for example, the Declaration on Tuberculosis or the Declaration on Non-Communicable Diseases that we were able to produce during this high-level week. So it would be, I'm encouraged to see that you are interested, and we will continue to do consultations and to embark in a negotiation that would really, so we can, harvest a very strong stand for universal health coverage.
Okay, I have a colleague here, and then Dr. Abadi, and then Mr. Abadi. Okay, go ahead, please, and then Edith in the back, and of course I noticed you, and you, Stefano. Go ahead.
Thank you. Maria from TAS News Agency. If you allow me, I will ask in Spanish. Ayer hubo una discusión grande en la Asamblea General sobre la reforma del Consejo de Seguridad y parece que no se ve la decisión final sobre la reforma. ¿Cómo piensa usted? Si se necesita algún límite de tiempo para esta reforma y qué opina sobre diferentes variantes de la reforma. Y yo tengo la segunda cuestión.
I think, yeah, I'm going to probably move on, and then I get back to you, okay? Okay, before we answer this one, Mr. Abadi, please.
Thank you, Monica.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Madam President, for a very comprehensive progress report. I have a question about one of your priorities, namely the reforms of the Security Council. It has been 50 years now since the Council was reformed, and 25 years since the negotiating process has started. The same ideas, the same formulations, the same proposals have been submitted over and over again, and to lead to nowhere. There is a deadlock. Einstein defined this as the definition of insanity, to expect different things while trying the same thing over and over again. From your point of view, do you think there is a need now for considering new ideas for the reforms of the Security Council? Thank you.
Madam President, since this is the same area, if you allow me, I'm going to go to AP, and then you can answer the two questions. Yeah, and after I'm aware of you guys. Yeah. Edith, you have the floor. Edith Lederer, you have the floor, but you don't have the mic.
I found
Okay,
it.
well
Thank
done.
you very much. Madam President, going back to the issue of migration, if you had a chance to be in a room with all of the countries that are leaders of the countries that are planning to stay away, what would you tell them?
Thank you. Okay. Security Council.
Security Council reform. Two questions regarding that, and a gentle reminder that we have been, the last reform happened 50 years ago, when the geopolitics were completely different at the scenario that we have now and today. You also reminded us that we've been negotiating, no, we're not, but we've been considering Security Council reform for 25 years, and we have been negotiating under a mandate of the General Assembly 10 years now, under the form of an IGN, an intergovernmental negotiating process. And that the outcome is not what we have expected. But I tend to be an optimist. You know that I was here, I was the PR of Ecuador here in New York when we passed the resolution calling for the IGN process 10 years ago. I was here in 2008, 2009. So I thought, well, this is it. now. We have the mandate, and we will just embark in a reform process. And in my naive, approach, I thought that 2 or 3 meetings, and then perhaps we will just come up with white smoke, as we say in Spanish, humo blanco, and that was going to be it. 10 years later, when you look at the scenario, it is really not discouraging at all, because this is a very contentious, complex issue. If I had made that exercise, of course there are groups, the United for Consensus, the L69, the African group that has a very strong position, 54 countries, etc., etc. Within the P5, each country has a different position on the issue. And if you put together all the different groupings and all the different positions, then you come up with a document that try to put together all the different views and just point out the parts and aspects of the reform that have larger agreement, not to speak about consensus, but perhaps larger agreement. So what we have now, we have 4 documents in front of us. Yesterday, I saw and I heard with great attention to what the different groups were asking for and their positions. We have seen slight changes and new elements. We have countries that really are providing a list of issues to consider that are extremely important. So I think that we do not lack, that's my view, but it's not that we lack new ideas, because the ideas and the positions are there. What we need now is the necessary political will to have progress and really, look at the pieces of the puzzle and see where we want to go. And here in this very specific issue, I have to be extremely respectful that this is a member state-driven process. Of course, I can lead, I can guide, I can transit together with member states on this very issue. But I think that my personal position or take on this particular issue, it's irrelevant at this point. So I wouldn't be that pessimistic. I think that there are some very clear, strong elements, and that is not that we are lacking ideas. Perhaps we need to be more creative on the form rather than on the content. But that, of course, would depend heavily on the willingness and the rhythm and the pace that member states want to provide to this process.
I don't want, if you would like the answer to be in Spanish, that was your intention. No, it's okay. Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, it's because I tried to respond to both your questions that were on the same.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. So we now have you here, and then Stefano. Yeah, let's go. Oh, you have your, okay, we'll get back to you. She would like to know about the migration, the people in the room.
Oh,
countries in the room.
Okay, your question, I miss, it's a very important question. It's not, I think that I am not only imagining a room where I could, speak about the beauties of the compact. I have experienced and done that, especially in Paris, where we had a very good presence of heads of state and government. I took the time to speak, to, I would say, almost practically, I would say 15, 20 heads of state and government on this particular issue of the migration compact. And I think that the message, I would perhaps say 3 things. One, that the compact is not a legally binding instrument. It is a framework to encourage cooperation and exchange. Second, I would say that the compact fully respects the sovereign right of states to decide over their migration policies. The compact doesn't counter the sovereign right of state to decide over their migration policies. And number three, that migration is by nature a transboundary phenomenon that has been part of human history, and that we need to tackle this phenomenon from a multilateral cooperation stand. And the only way to do that is to have a shared framework to refer to when things happen. And that shared framework to refer to is the Global Compact on Migration. But of course, again, we have to be very respectful on the domestic dynamics of countries and to wait for them to be prepared to join the compact.
And on that, Madam President, I have to acknowledge a tweet that has been just issued by one of the colleagues here. She's not here today. She must be in a story. Pamela Falk has actually tweeted about the Global Compact on Migration, your conference right now. She just did. Okay, let's go to you, and then Stefano. Go ahead. And I think we're going to have to wrap up, guys, unfortunately, because we're going to have the... Stefan. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. My name is Ali Barada. I work for France 24 and Sharq al-Awsat newspaper. The General Assembly has been condemned by the U.S. Several times because of the so many resolutions in so many fronts, and especially for the Palestinian question. And I wonder whether you've been approached by the U.S. To reduce the number of the resolutions with regards to Palestine and the Palestinian people. There are 16 resolutions. The U.S. has been saying that's too many. They haven't done any good to the Palestinian people, and maybe a new avenue should be taken by either merging some of those resolutions or canceling some of them. How do you respond to the attacks against the General Assembly and about this specific issue? Thank you.
Thank you. And very quickly, Stefano, and last you, Carla. Stefano, sorry about this. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President. Stefano Vaccara, La Voce di New York and Radio Radicale in Rome. First, is 70 years of a Universal Declaration of Human Rights is not binding document too, and in the last 70 years, some of those articles there have progress, some less. So what is your presidency, which one you think had less, if you want, progress or attention and deserve your attention the most, okay, of all those 30 articles? And then is a follow-up on the question about journalism. There is another, I don't know if we can consider journalist. I ask you if you consider him a journalist or a publisher, you tell me. But another one has been lucky being inside the diplomatic institution, the one of Ecuador in London, I mean, for the last few years, I think 6 years, because has been protected by Ecuador so far, okay? We're talking about Julian Assange. Well, now Julian Assange, we heard there's been, there is an indictment maybe, there is, I mean, the Justice Department of the United States is going after him, it seems. Now, what do you think about him, first of all? He's a journalist, he's a publisher, should be protected by the First Amendment. Tell us about it also, because you had to deal with him for some time.
Thank you, Stefano. And we're going to get the last question on Carla. And of course, we have to invite you for a new press conference next month. But Carla, very briefly, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ecuador, as you undoubtedly know, was the president of the G77 last year, and there was a plan for Ecuador as the current president, South Africa as the prior president, and Thailand as the future president to go to North Korea, which would be an involvement of the United Nations in the issue, which actually has not happened before. At the last moment, the president of Ecuador was recalled given 1 week to return to the capital, and that, of course, sabotaged the plan. There was indication that there was pressure for this to happen. Is there anything that the General Assembly can do? First, I would appreciate your looking into this and finding out what actually happened and why, if you can. And is there anything the General Assembly can do to mount some kind of personal on-the-ground intervention into the DPRK, which is now reaching out to the rest of the world? I believe Kim has even asked for the Pope to visit. And it would seem appropriate that the United Nations be more involved in this and not just the U.S.
Thank you, Carla. 3 questions, and Madam President, we will conclude by answering the 3 questions. Thank you very much, and then Stefani will be here. Thanks.
Yes, I think that, I don't know which question came first on the 70 years of the Declaration, Universal Declaration of Human Rights that was signed in Paris 70 years ago. When you say just pick an article out of the 30 articles of the Declaration, and I would say it is absolutely impossible to do that, because human rights by nature are about human dignity, and human rights cannot be divided, chosen upon. Human rights are indivisible and universal by nature. And I think that the challenge we face is to harmonize the relationship between civil and political rights with economic, social, and cultural rights. This is a tension. It's either you have one or the other, but they're not exclusive. They are mutually reinforcing. And I think that we will celebrate here in New York the 70th anniversary. This is going to happen on this time I think I'm right on the date, but it's going to happen on the 18th of December, because it's really worthwhile commemorating the 70th anniversary, because we still have so many challenges in complying with every one of the 30 articles of the Universal Declaration on human rights. I think the holistic approach is the one that has to be applied when dealing with human rights. Regarding your question on Assange, I have to tell you something in a very honest way. I cannot make comments on Ecuadorian foreign policy. I am not the foreign minister anymore. This is up to the Ecuadorian authorities to say whatever the Ecuadorian foreign policy is about. I can comment on issues regarding the General Assembly's work, the United Nations, the need for a stronger multilateralism. Of course, I will not hide that, but I have my personal views on that. And what is the category of Julian Assange, whether he's a journalist or he's not? For me, he's a human being, and his human rights should be fully protected. And that is what is most important, perhaps. The issue is the North Korea. So your question had 2 parts. On the Ecuadorian part, I will not comment. I think that we should ask the Ecuadorian authorities. I don't see the connection, honestly, but okay. I mean, we have to ask the Ecuadorian authorities. But regarding North Korea, I see and follow every day, and during my media briefs every morning, I am following closely the developments in the Korean Peninsula in general. I think that we have to encourage the positive signs that we have seen in both of the streams of the issue. One stream is the inter-Korean conversations, dialogue, and hopefully a final peace agreement between the 2 countries, which is extremely necessary and hoped for. So this, of course, relies on the political will of 2 leaders that are open and that are really taking strong stance towards a peace process that is extremely desirable. The other issue is on the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. And here again, there are positive developments. We follow with interest these positive developments, and we have also to respect the dynamics of the conversations. There are good and positive signs on both of the two fronts. The peace on the Korean Peninsula and the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is on the benefit of world peace and of all of us here. So we see that these developments with high interest.
Okay, so is that the end?
Okay, so
So before,
oh yes, sorry, no, I want to answer your question because your question has two elements. No, one element that is extremely important is the proliferation of resolutions of the General Assembly, proliferation of resolutions, proliferation of mandates, and sometimes the challenge that we all face to deliver on all the existing mandates. This process is part of the current concern of all member states. This is part of the work of the negotiating process of the revitalization of the General Assembly. Issues of mainstreaming, issues of better organizing the work of the General Assembly. So there is some willingness for greater discipline and organization in the works of the General Assembly and the production of resolutions and the compliance part. So this conversation is ongoing and extremely important. But on the Palestinian issue, but because this is a separate issue, I have not had any conversation, that was your question, regarding whether we have too many or too few Palestinian resolutions, 16 resolutions on the Palestinian issue. We haven't touched on the issue, and the Palestinian issue, in my view, should continue to be part of the agenda until we come to a durable, sustainable solution on the Palestinian question.
What about the U.S. attacks on the General Assembly?
I think we're going to
The U.S. attacks on the General Assembly?
Against the General, yeah.
Well, I have to say and recall that I had a very productive conversation with President Trump, and his call is for greater efficiency and response capacity of the General Assembly, and we agree on that. And this is something that we're working on.
We're going to have to wrap up. I'm really, really sorry, but Madam President would like to say a few words about your big day coming up.
Well, first of all, that's happy Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving does not exist in my country, of course. In most of our countries, it does not exist. But I think it's a very nice occasion to gather with family and to be together and to rest a little bit. I think the message of Thanksgiving, which is giving thanks to interculturality, I have to apologize. Sometimes I make up some words. You know, I don't think that interculturality exists. But in any case, the encounter of different cultures and different traditions, a celebration of that is extremely positive, especially today that we are discussing at the General Assembly Hall the day of commemorating slavery, especially the slavery, transatlantic slavery. I think that it is Thanksgiving, it is an opportunity to remind ourselves that one of the sources of wealth of humanity is our diverse nature and the wealth of the encounter of different cultures. Also very much looking forward to your gala on the 5th of December. I hope that I have the date right this time. So I will see you all there, and I'm very much looking forward to be with you that very special day. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, everybody.